Hi, everyone. I'm Christopher Brown.
My name is Afiz Dengabisi.
And I'm Winter Green, and here's our leading change article presentation. So, a brief summary of what we're going to discuss within this presentation is the article Change Without Pain. It conveys the concept of dynamic stability being an effective approach to achieve enduring organizational change. The major points that we're going to touch on within this presentation is dynamic stability. That's a topic that's going to come up multiple times. Tinkering and kludging, employee engagement, guiding principles, sustainable change, and a balanced approach. So, dynamic stability, the concept that we're going to touch on multiple times. To change successfully, companies should stop changing all the time. And what we mean by that is simple. Think about Apple. That's a huge company, but what do we know it for? We know it for not only the Macintosh computer, or the Mac as we call it colloquially now. We know it for the iPhone or even Apple TV, but this change did not happen all at once. These larger changes, such as the iPhone or Apple TV, they happened gradually, and integrated between those massive changes were the smaller ones that were used to ensure that there was change without pain inside of that organization. And this is accomplished by the process of tinkering and kludging.
Tinkering is being more of an adaptable approach in this article. Um, Abrahamson stated in a quote, tinkering involves reconfiguring existing practices and business model rather than starting from scratch. This really just means that instead of starting from square one, improving on your current processes and flourishing from there. And that would allow everyone in the organization to flow a lot better. Next topic would be avoiding drastic and disruptive changes within the organization. Having a constant flow would allow everyone to flow a lot better when changes happens. Instead of throwing new concept at employees, it would be best to have standard work and allow everyone to slowly bring themselves into a new change within the organization. And then also utilizing what already exists within the organization. This is one of the core principles that Eric stated in the article. Instead of reinventing the wheel, the approach encourages companies to leverage their existing resources, assets, and knowledge to adapt to changing circumstances within the organization. Kludging, integrating new elements using in-house assets and resources. And then also leveraging existing skills, technologies, and models, and then also focusing on reusing resources within the organization. This pretty much means without, like I said before, originally with tinkering, instead of reinventing the entire wheel, we're just going to flourish each skill that each person have within the organization, so everyone could touch on this overall.
So let's talk about employee engagement. To have a successful organization that is accomplishing change without pain, you have to have that employee buy-in. So to ensure that our employees are engaged in achieving change without pain, once dynamic stability is accomplished by utilizing tinkering and kludging, we will succeed in that. The example utilized in the text was the example of the Cold War helicopters. In spite of having these helicopters be a less costly, more innovative way of being creative, our employees were already burnt out, which is not really conducive to achieving that change without pain. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of our employees and having them not burn out so they can actually buy into our company.
So, Abrahamson goes into four guiding principles that successful organizations and companies use in order to facilitate a sustainable dynamic stability. The first being reward shameless borrowing, The second being to appoint a chief memory officer. Third being tinkering and kludging internally first. And the fourth being to hire a generalist. So the first point really just goes into kind of plucking the best components of systems as well as processes that you already have internally. This is where Abrahamson speaks about creative imitation and nobody wanting to be a copycat, but in a way tinkering those copycat ideas to fit your model. Now, appointing a chief memory officer is in efforts to kind of document and debrief some of the analytical effectiveness and success of those change efforts that you put in place. We want to make sure that we help the decision making when it comes to innovation by kind of having that historical background. Third being to tinker and kludge internally first. This is more so you kind of want to fix what's at home before you go and try to help everyone else, or in that way yourself. We want to make sure that we're taking that reflective moment to see some of the processes that we've put in place and be more open-minded about the things that we can change or the solutions that we can come up with in-house before we necessarily take it to an external route. And last being to hire generalists. Abrahamson explains generalists to be a sort of bread and butter to the company or the organization in general. These are individuals who come from a plethora of different places with skills and techniques, with raw materials that they can use to tinker and kludge for the successful dynamic stability of your organization. That being said, I know Abrahamson also goes into pacing, which just is to kind of, take big and small steps, but with meaningful intervals.
So a balanced approach. This is, we mostly touched on dynamic stability, avoiding overload within the organization, and learning from your past mistakes. This would definitely help you going forward within your personal organization, so you can learn and flourish as you go. For dynamic stability, this involves alternating major change initiatives with smaller organic modifications. So like we said earlier, instead of reinventing the wheel, I'm going to always touch on this, instead of reinventing the wheel completely, we're just going to see what we currently have on hand and improve upon that as we go. Next would be avoiding overload. This can lead to initiative overload and organizational chaos. This can be seen in workplaces that changes workflow drastic, with the expectation that all employees can easily catch on to it. Learning from your past mistakes. The article suggests learning from past experiences and mistakes will facilitate successful and enduring transformations, which aligns with the idea of continuous improvement and balanced approach to change.
So connections to previous works. While there are connections to multiple outside sources, the information that has been discussed in the previous modules is significant. In module 1, we discussed cultural sensitivities, and that is derived from the cultural dimensions theory. For instance, in a country or a nation state comparable to the United States and our dynamics with the dynamics between men and women, masculinity versus femininity, if we see a relationship between an employer and their subordinate, and we want to evaluate how they perceive that they are with respect to equality, we will find that that level of equality or that understanding of being equal is much higher than it would be in a third world country, for instance, because that dynamic of masculinity versus femininity does not exist in nations like that. So it's important to always have a cultural dimensions theory in the back of your mind when understanding the connotations or the feelings behind the individuals in your organization. But we also found that there was a connection to the Leading Change article, Why Transformation Efforts Fail by Cotter. because both articles just touch on managing generally and the difficulties that emerge from being in management.
A major interpretation. There are numerous interpretations that were discussed by Abrahamson. The first one would be implementing a balance between major and incremental changes. To avoid initiative overload and organizational chaos, implement a dynamic stability approach, which includes combining major changes at intervals with smaller organic modifications to ensure adaptation to new challenges while maintaining stability and employee buy-in. The next will be viewing tinkering and kludging as effective strategies. To promote creative resourcefulness for effective change through tinkering, which involves reconfiguring existing practices and models, and kludging, which entails in integrating new elements using in-house assets and resources. Next thing would be thoughtful pacing and change of efforts. This advocates for measured change implementation, as rapid changes often lead to burnout and resistance by employees, fostering a supportive environment that encourages employee acceptance and embracing new initiatives. By doing this, employees will be more lenient on changes and will be easier to train when new task arises.
All right, so lastly here, we're going to talk about some tempered takeaways and key ideas that were pulled from the article. Now, one thing that we do know for sure is that change is so disruptive that it can tear organizations apart. So as change specialists, we want to make sure that we are cognizant of the change that is going on around us. We want to make sure that we're dispersing our change efforts, whether they be long or short, in an appropriate amount of time, and going about these processes with a better mental mindset, excuse me. That being said, as well as dynamic stability, we want to make sure that we're allowing this advantage to kind of be taken when it comes to change. That way we can actually have survivors left over after a change effort. Now, with that being said, in contrast to regular stability, the goal is within dynamic stability to sustain both over a long and short period of time those change efforts. As I said before, we also want to make sure that we appoint a chief of memory. This is just as a fail-safe to make sure that we're not making mistakes that we did within the past. And we are also taking advantage of the valuable opportunities that we do see now. We want to make sure that we internally diagnose and have reflections of some of the analytical processes that we do put in place. That way we can come up with new solutions and pathways that were never imagined. This in that regard being tinkering and kludging. To pace yourself as well within the society that we work in, we are known to have a very fast-paced demand and supply network. With that being said, we want to make sure that we are pacing ourselves within our creative imitation and doing things that are going to be best for the organization in question. This is a marathon, not a sprint, but at the end of the day, we do want to win a race. And the last two things is remaining cognizant and emotionally aware of your company's environment. You want to make sure that you can actually take notice of the changes as well as some of the emotional ambiguity that happens within a change effort before and after. And lastly, considering being a generalist your bread and butter. This means to hire, become, or learn as a generalist. They have the biggest plethora of skills, resources, and skills and resources. And with that being said, they would be the most ideal candidate to help your change effort because they have those things in a light of adaptability. The more you know. But with that being said, I'm going to call for the conclusion of our presentation. If there are any questions, please direct them to us now.